Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Faysal Hawlader, lecturer, Department of Anatomy, Eastern Medical College. Today I am going to discuss about base of the skull. The interior of the base of the skull is divided into anterior cranial fossa, medial cranial fossa and the posterior cranial fossa. This is the anterior cranial fossa and this is the medial cranial fossa and this is the posterior cranial fossa. The anterior cranial fossa is separated from the medial cranial fossa by the posterior margin of the laser wing on each side and the sulcus chiasmaticus on the median plane. Now, boundary of the anterior cranial fossa. Anteriorly, it is formed by the inner surface of the squamous part of frontal bone, and floor is formed by the on each side orbital plate of the frontal bone, and in the midline cribriform plate of ethmoid bone, and posteriorly it is formed by the laser wing of the sphenoid bone and the body of sphenoid. Uh, this is the floor of the anterior cranial fossa and it is formed by the orbital plate of the frontal bone, and in the midline it is formed by the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone. This is the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone, and posteriorly it is formed by the laser wing of sphenoid on each side, and in the midline it is formed by the body of sphenoid. The anterior cranial fossa is contain frontal lobe of cerebral hemisphere on each side. The cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone is from the roof of the nasal cavity. On each side, it presents a number of small aperture. And what are the structure passes through this aperture? It passes olfactory nerve from the nasal mucosa to the olfactory bulb. This is the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone, and on each side it contains a number of small aperture and it passes olfactory nerve. A triangular process known as cristagalli. Now, what is cristagalli? A triangular process projects upward from the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone, and cristagalli is a part of cribriform plate of ethmoid bone and it gives attachment to the fox cerebri. This is the triangular process known as cristagalli and it gives attachment to the fox cerebri. Now, what is fox cerebri? It is a dural fold. We know that there are four dural folds: fox cerebri, fox cerebelli, tentorium cerebelli and the diaphragma shala. Anterior and posterior ethmoidal canal open extradurally on each side of the cribriform plate. They transmit respectively anterior and posterior ethmoidal vessel and nerve from the orbital cavity. The medial end of posterior margin of laser wing is known as anterior crinoid process and it provides attachment to the anterior end of the free margin of the tentorium cerebelli. This is the posterior margin of the laser wing of sphenoid and it gives a process in the medial line. This is known anterior clinoid process and it gives attachment to the anterior of the anterior end of the free margin of the tentorium cerebelli. This is sulcus chiasmaticus. It's a transverse sulcus which forms the posterior boundary of the anterior cranial fossa in the median plane, and sulcus chiasmaticus leads the optic canal. This is optic canal. Now, what are the structures transmitted through the optic canal? Optic nerve and ophthalmic artery. Ophthalmic artery is a branch of internal carotid artery. Between the crista galli and frontal crest, there is a foramen known as foramen cecum. This is foramen cecum. And what are the structures transmitted through the foramen cecum? Emissary vein is transmitted through the foramen cecum, and it connects olfactory mucosa with the superior sagittal sinus. We know that fox cerebri has attached border and a preborder, and attached border is related to the superior sagittal sinus and preborder is related to the inferior sagittal sinus. Again, we repeat the anterior cranial fossa. It is formed by the anteriorly by inner surface of the ischiumous flat of frontal bone, and floor is formed by the on each side orbital plate of the frontal bone, and in the midline it is formed by the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone, and posteriorly it is formed by the laser wings of sphenoid and the body of sphenoid. And cribriform plate of ethmoid bone gives a triangular process known as crista galli, and the attachment of crista galli is fox cerebri, and on each side of the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone contain a number of apertures which transmits the olfactory nerve. Between the frontal crest and crista galli, there is a foramen known as foramen cecum which transmits emissary vein.